All right, we are back for another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. Feel like it's been quite a while since we've done one of these, but I am back with my main man, Ryan Hasell, aka the Dojo Dietitian. Dojo, where are you tuning in from?
Right now over in New Orleans in the States. So after you headed back to Oz, I've done a little bit of traveling around, checked out Austin, and here I am in Swamp City, and just got in actually. So getting ready to do some exploring and stuff through the week. But at the moment, it's like 8 o'clock at night here. So just about to wind down for the night.
Yeah, I've interrupted Dojo's holiday to make him do a episode with us, just so we can recap the fight week that we just had. So we both just did UFC 277 in Dallas, Texas. I feel like it was a long time ago. We only just got back, but I feel like we're in the middle of this pretty heavy travel schedule at the moment. We had UFC 276 in Las Vegas just a few weeks before, and then we got UFC 277 Dallas, which we just completed. And then this weekend I'm flying out, and Dojo and I will both be doing UFC 278, where Leon Edwards will be fighting Kamaru Usman for the welterweight belt. So it's a lot of travel kind of shoved into 6, 7, 8 week little block. But yeah, it was a pretty cool week. I just want to go over it and recap it, because I feel like whenever I do any of these fight weeks, and I've been doing them for years and years and years, I always learn so much. I feel like when you take all the theory and take everything that we do and write down on paper, it is one thing, but it's a complete other thing when you put it to practice, and not only put it to practice, but do it at the highest level, the absolute most elite level. And for that fight, we had Blood Diamond, who was fighting his second UFC fight, and we had Kai Kara-France, who fought Brandon Moreno for the UFC interim flyweight title. And it's huge fights, right? Especially for Kai. It was a massive, massive fight. So coming into that week, we needed to get so many things right, because it was everything was on the line. It was the biggest fight of his career. And it's just when you're at that level, putting the pressures on, you really don't have any room for error. And at that level, it really shows, right? What were your thoughts of the week? Talk us through, Dojo.
Yeah, look, this is my first big fight week. And I think the most eye-opening thing for me, as someone who's just come into the space, is just how intense it all is. Like, there's, as you said, like it's a different vibe around the fighters when they're at, like, competing at this level. Like, literally everything has to be on point, and you're kind of going nonstop, just trying to make sure we're ticking the boxes. All right, what do we got to do next? Have we got everything we need? Just making sure that the boys have everything they need as well, kind of like on the run all the time. And I think that's probably the most eye-opening thing that you don't see from the outside, is like the behind the scenes, how much work really goes into it. Obviously, I think it's probably something that people would know if they follow you and like see some of your posting schedules and stuff. But yeah, like probably averaged at like 3-4 hours sleep a night through the week, just finishing late, getting stuff done, and then getting up in the morning to train before the boys are up. Like, there's a lot that goes into it, and that was probably the most eye-opening thing for me, just kind of seeing how it all functions behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I get a lot of students and I get a lot of other young practitioners, and they message me and they always go, you know what, man, I'd love your job. I absolutely love it. I would do anything to do what you do. And I think, you know what? Social media is cool, but it tells a very different story to what actually does go on. And don't get me wrong, like, I absolutely love what we do, but I can't really think of any other job in this space, in the nutrition or sports performance space, where there is a job as quite intense as what we do, especially during those fight weeks. Like Ryan said, a daily schedule for us. Like we said, we still want to get up and train. We still want to do everything. We need to train. We need to eat well. But the priority is to get the guys on point with their weight as efficiently as possible every single day of that week. So a day for us looks like we're up at 5 a.m. because we need to train before they wake up, and we've got to get breakfast. They usually wake up anytime between 8 and 9 a.m. So we're up at 5 a.m. We eat ourselves, like roll out, do whatever. And then we train for an hour and a half, 2 hours, go back, shower, get everything ready. And then the day kind of starts at 8 a.m. when these guys wake up. But then you're feeding them breakfast, and then, it's like clockwork every 3 to 4 hours. And you've got, okay, at midday, we've got to get them another snack, and then at 4 p.m., we've got to get them a meal, and then we've got another snack, and then we've got to get them a pre-training meal again at 7 p.m. And then, okay, right before they go to training, we're going to give them a little something. And then after training, which is, for this week, the guys were training at like 10:30 p.m. at night, because Kai was fighting quite late. So they weren't going to bed till 11:30. So we were getting them dinner at 11:30 p.m. And by the time you finish and cook everything and clean it up, it's already 12:30, 1 a.m. So then it's 12:30, 1 a.m. And then, you know, if we want to get our training in and do whatever, we're up at 5 a.m. the next day. So it's literally, you're doing 20, 21 hour days. And you say it to people and they go, oh, what? That doesn't really what it looks like on social media. And you go, yeah, because social media, all we're doing is taking photos of like the
little
meals,
snapshots of a day.
Yeah, hanging out with the guys. And don't get me wrong, like it's so fun. And like we're talking about it, like it's not a bad thing. Like it's an intense schedule. Don't get me wrong, it's very intense. It is super fun, like hanging out with the guys and especially the team, and you know, hanging out with all the coaches in between and just going through that with the fighter is a very, very I think unique experience. Like the bonds that you make with the guys when you're with them. Like I usually stay in the room, say with Kai, where you're literally like bunking in with him and then cooking every meal and hanging out with them and seeing how they go through that fight week. What did you think on that end? Like seeing how the fighters went through the fight, especially Kai, like coming up to the biggest fight of his life. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think like, well, one of the big things for me is like it kind of made a lot of sense as to like why these guys are at the level that they are, seeing like how they all function during fight week. Like obviously the team and stuff as well, but then the athletes, like they're so on point with like everything, like getting their sleep, getting their nutrition in during the week, doing their training sessions, like everything is really, really sharp. And I think like obviously we work with fighters from all different levels, and there's plenty of guys like the local scene that work really hard. But I think that was like the most eye-opening thing for me, is just seeing like that's really what differentiates these guys, I think, from the rest of the guys that maybe haven't made into the UFC yet, or that are in the UFC but not quite at that level, is just like their commitment to like literally getting everything to be perfect, like through the week. And then obviously that's just kind of like the tip of the iceberg of like, that's probably what they've been doing for like 10 weeks, right? Like through their whole camp. So yeah, that was really, really cool to see, is just how like on point the guys are at that level.
Yeah, this is something me and Israel spoke about after the fights. Me and Israel sat down and spoke about it. Obviously, Kai didn't get the result we were after, but yeah, me and Iz were saying it's a crazy sport, because at that level, it's literally a game of inches. And Kai is one of the guys, and Israel even said he's probably the most dedicated and committed guy in that entire gym, and that's a gym of superstars. So that's really saying something, where Kai will just make sure he gets all of those 1%ers. Like he gets his nutrition on point for 10 weeks. His hydration is on point. His sleep, he's so fanatic with his sleep, making sure he gets good quality sleep every single night, gives himself a good sleep opportunity. He's making sure that he's having all the supplements, the recovery. He literally bought a sauna and an ice bath to have in his garage so he could get on top of his recovery. He's doing pool sessions with Dave Wood. He's doing his mental coaching with Dave Neath. He's doing literally everything you can, and also doing the training schedule. There is no stone unturned, because at that level, you have to be like that. You just absolutely have to be like that. And that's for 10 weeks straight, which is also an accumulation of about 10 plus years of being like that. And so like Dojo's saying, when you get to this week, it's kind of like the finale of all of this work and all of this preparation, which I always feel to an extent builds up the pressure and the intensity of it, right? Because it's all of this work, like months and months and months. And in cases like Kai, decades of experience coming into this point where it's like, okay, we've done all this work, and it amounts to this. And we have to keep this train rolling. We have to get everything right, because at the end of the day, I think this is something we don't talk about a lot too, is like that fight week is extremely stressful for the athletes. And I feel one of the biggest stresses for these athletes going through the fight week is making weight. Making weight is just so much more amplified on that level, because you've just got media all around you. Like you've got so many cameras, so many people watching you, and especially Eugene's attitude towards missing weight. Like there's almost a zero policy tolerance with it, right? That's why we have a job. That's why we are so involved with these guys, is because they hold such high standards of themselves about making weight. And at that level, it isn't just making weight. Like we've got to make weight and put these guys in the best position so they don't waste all of this work that they've done. So the pressure is really on, not only just to be making these guys food and, you know, getting that weight down every day. You've got to be making them food that they're enjoying, that's increasing their level of enjoyment throughout the day. That's taking away that stress. It's giving them an experience. You know, they can't be like too miserable, that you've got to do everything you possibly can to push the total amount of calories you can get in. Okay, what's the total amount of carbs that we can get in and make sure that we can still lose this weight? You need to be pushing all of those limits, but then mentally making sure that they're still losing the weight every single day, that they're, you don't want to say feeling good, because no one feels overly good when they're cutting weight, but feeling as best as they can when they're making that weight. So all that stress is taken off. And that's, you kind of wear that burden. You take that burden on when you go, okay, I'm going to help you for these 6-7 days, and I'm going to help you do this in the best way possible.
Mm. And I think that's like one of the points there, Geordie, like I think, which was cool to see, was that I think a lot of the experience of the fighters, even at the UFC and that kind of thing around fight week, is like generally the idea, or like, and it makes sense, right? Is like to just get in the exact like macros that they need for every meal, and that's it. And then like what that ends up being in fight week is like dry chicken and maybe some avocado or something at every single meal, or like maybe some salmon, but with like no flavoring or anything, because you're avoiding carbs, you're avoiding sodium, you're avoiding all that stuff. So it was also really cool to see like just how important it is to kind of be creative and put little twists on things to make things like, you know, he made the fried chicken and all that kind of stuff that showed up on the Instagram, which the boys seem to really appreciate. And Kai was even saying like back in some of his old UFC fights, like how boring the food was, and like that would just add to that mental pressure, right, that they're already going through. Like they're already like not really happy that they're having to like not starve themselves, but like eat less, I guess, carbs and stuff than what they normally would. And then on top of that, they're having like shit tasting food. It's really just going to add to that mental burden. So that was really cool to see. The boys actually seemed to be pretty happy every time the food was coming around. Like seemed to be a bit of like a highlight for them. And that was really cool to see for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I've been really big on over the years, is it's got to be an experience, right? Like it's not just good enough to translate those numbers, because anyone can do that. Really, you can open best practice guidelines from any sheet or download a PDF, and you could technically figure out how to do it, and they'll make weight, but it's definitely not the best way that they can do it. And this is where I always bang on about knowing your fighter, right? Like that's the 10th camp that me and Kai have done together. So it's like I know exactly what foods he likes, what he doesn't like. And the types of foods and the amounts of foods that we've eaten over the years has changed dramatically. Like, and you would have even noticed that the way that I fed Kai and Bloods is very different because of different taste preferences, like when they want certain foods, how much you can get away. Like Kai was really, really good with his weight. So we could get away with giving him, you know, fiber all week. We could get away with giving him way more carbohydrates. We could get away with giving him dessert, quote unquote, almost 3-4 times a day, every single day. So he was feeling good and he had enough energy for training. Whereas, you know, like Bloods, who's cutting a little bit more weight, doesn't have that leeway, but you can still make it a really good experience for him. So knowing your fighter and knowing what you can do for them to, one, alleviate the stress, two, make sure they make the weight, but make it a really good experience is so important. It goes such a long way, because like we keep saying, these fight weeks, the pressure that is on these guys and the pressure that is on us is just so big. And it, again, towards the end of the week, you're getting sleep deprived, you're getting, you know, you're lacking energy, you're still training, you're still doing all of this, but everything's kind of coming to this accumulation of, okay, we got to make this weight and we got to get this off. And I always think, if I'm feeling like this, imagine what these guys are feeling like. If I'm stressing out about this, imagine what these guys are feeling like. It's so intense for the fighter. And it's something I think the UFC do a pretty good job, like with embedded, by showing some of the behind the scenes. But unless you're physically with that fighter and you're seeing them all week and go through this, and even not even what the media shows, like seeing them do media interviews and everything, but then hanging out with them afterwards and being like, yeah, how are you doing this? Like, how are you feeling? And them going, yeah, you know what? Like, I feel good. I feel focused. I feel sharp. Like I'm in the zone. Like I'm starting to like grow into this body. Like I'm ready. I'm mentally there, and seeing them, how they transform throughout the week is really, really cool. But like we keep saying, that's a accumulation of months of effort and all of these little 1%ers throughout that week amounting to that. And I don't want to put too much emphasis on the diet because it's just one tiny little part of this whole prep. But during that fight week, there is so much emphasis on getting that right. So doing those little things like making these dishes better, making it taste really good, getting creative, having lots of colors, giving them dessert multiple times throughout the day, it makes a huge difference by the time they end up going in the cage.
Yeah, like, and not just from like a physical point of view, but just mental point of view. I feel like it takes a lot of stress off the fighters to have someone there who can like handle that stuff without them having to think like, okay, how many grams of protein do I need? And then just, or like fat and stuff, and just having like chicken and like almonds or something all week. And then by the end of the week, they're just completely burnt out, flavor fatigue. And that just like adds to all that mental burden. So yeah, I think it's a really important thing that people probably wouldn't consider to be important, but I feel like it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And I think something I talk about a lot, and don't get me wrong, like I don't want people to listen to this and think that when we talk about fight week strategies that you can like just give people heaps of carbs and load them up on fiber and still make weight. I'm a very big advocate that I think we've still got a long way to go when it comes to the science of fight week strategies. And really a lot of the recommendations that we do have currently are probably extrapolated from the wrong populations. Like a lot of the data we have, say, for what we do with fiber is taken from laparoscopic clinical patients, right? And then we only really have that one study that kind of looks at this clinical population and what happens when you isolate fiber and take it down with people who are acutely trying to lose mass in, for a weigh-in. It's very, very different. I think you need to have a good guideline of that, but I think you can play with that a lot more than what people give credit for. And I think a lot of fighters make the mistake of almost reducing too much when it comes to fight weeks. They reduce their calories too much. They reduce their carbs too much. They cut all the fiber out. And like you said, it leads them to eating these super boring foods and these super boring meals that cause palate fatigue, that cause like mental exhaustion, that adds an additional layer of stress to them. So I think like knowing the fighter, being around them enough, and then being able to make decisions in real time is really, really important, because you can have all these things set out and go, I want to give these guys 50 grams of carbs, 50 grams of fiber, blah, blah, blah. But then in real time, their weight tracks a bit better. And you know what? Oh, wait, Kai's feeling like quite flat, so I need to give him extra carbohydrates these days. And then you can bump it up and go. But I think that's really, really important. And I think having a good understanding, okay, this is what the guidelines say we should do, but really in reality, I know for this athlete, I can push it to this much and this much. And if I see these signs and symptoms in them, I'm going to push it even further. Having that understanding is extremely important. Again, especially if you want to get every little 1% out of these guys during the fight week.
Yeah, and I think that's similar to like even like clinical work, right? Where you might be in the hospital and then like you're treating a patient and you're looking up like the guidelines of how to do something, right? But then like over the years of practicing and working with people, and you kind of figure out like what actually works versus like what makes sense based on the science, which maybe like is pretty loosely correlated, or if there's like the evidence isn't super strong. Sometimes like professional like just expertise or experience can be just as valuable as like being like, okay, the science showed if we cut fiber by like 30 grams we get this amount of weight loss, where like in reality like that might not actually be true, and there might be better ways to do it based on your own like experience as a practitioner, which is I guess something that you just kind of have to be in that space and then practice in that space for a while. Like obviously like you have for heaps of years now to kind of like make those decisions. It's not really something that you can kind of just or that you want to be playing around with for the first time at someone's UFC debut or at some like really high level fight or something like that. But yeah, I think that's a really cool way of looking at it, rather than just being like we have to do everything based on exactly what the science says, because like you said, the science isn't always one-to-one. Like a lot of the studies aren't even based on MMA athletes. Some of them might be based on clinical populations or even other sports that are kind of like maybe similar but just not exactly the same. So it's not always going to translate 100% in terms of like what works in the studies versus what works in real life.
Yeah. And I want to ask you, Doge, over the course of the week, it was obviously a pretty big week. What were the major things that took you by surprise about the week? Like whether that was, what we were doing with the athletes, the overall you know, group dynamic of what we're in, like location? What were some of the things that took you a bit more by surprise than what you were expecting?
I mean, the intensity of the team is like, that's always that was like a bit of a surprise, like just seeing, but I guess it makes sense, right? Like if these guys are all going to be like world-class coaches and athletes and stuff, like they're going to be intense and hold things to a certain standard, which is really cool to be around. Like being around those people kind of, I feel like it kind of builds up yourself and kind of like makes you want to do everything at that level as well, which is really cool to be around. I mean, just being away from Australia was different as well. Like obviously we're having to use different foods which like are kind of like unfamiliar or whatever, and like trying to navigate that space. Like, okay, what can we kind of improvise with to make these meals work, that like if we don't have access to like a Woolies or a Coles where there's all the foods that we would normally know, that was pretty different. I think other big standouts would be yeah, I mean, we already talked about it, right? But like the whole like schedule and just how intense everything is was very eye-opening. Like obviously we've been around weight cuts and stuff back home, but from our point of view of like this job, usually we're just brought in for that last like 24 hours, right? So we don't see too much of what happens during the week, like with a lot of our athletes. So it's cool to kind of be in that space and experience it firsthand of like what the athletes actually go through, their mental state through the week, and how that changes what like stage of the water load they're at, and how that can like affect things. Yeah, all of that stuff is just really cool to kind of like be there and get that firsthand experience with, to kind of like build up, I guess, my own like practitioner experience around that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, because there's so many little things that I feel like practitioners wouldn't really think about. Like one that I always talk to people about is like, okay, well, if you don't have access to a kitchen, right, you're not in an Airbnb. Sometimes we are in Airbnbs, but sometimes we're just in hotel rooms. And so this one, we were just in a hotel room. So I have a whole setup that is dedicated to making a portable kitchen. And it pretty much takes up a whole suitcase. And it's like, there's unique challenges with that, right? Like the first thing that always came to mind with me when I was trying to set this up is like food safety and standards. Like, how do you make sure that we've got like a fridge big enough to hold this food, or how do you manage to make sure you've only got certain amounts of food in the fridge so you can keep it cool and fresh and everything? And then when you're cooking and cleaning, how do you keep a really, you know, clean, sanitized area so like that is separate to everything else that's going on in the room, so you can make sure you're upholding certain standards? And then even on that, how do you get equipment? Like what type of equipment do you use for that? Like what type of cookers do you use? Do you use fryers? Do you use stovetops? Do you use gas cookers? Whatever. And then like what cooking material? And then, okay, you need to cook all this food without using any sodium. So what flavor profiles are you trying to go for? And then how do they work with certain meals? And like Dojo, you would have seen like that. I have a huge bag that's like 8 kilos that takes up way too much weight in my suitcase of just different spices that I've just found over
spices, yeah.
all the spices, and then sodium free like herbs and spices that I've just accumulated over the years to like have different flavor profiles for like different athletes. You got to have so many different, like Kai doesn't like spicy food, but say Israel and Bloods love spicy food. So you got to be able to like cater for both of them. And then when you're making a meal, be able to cater for those flavor profiles. So there's so much extra little things that go into it that you'll just never read about if you like opened a best practice guideline or even a book about how to make weight. They would never ever go through any of that. And I feel like that's why it's exciting, like what we're doing, like with these educational platforms that we're building out, because it was very eye-opening when I first started doing it, right? Like you can read all the books, you can do all of this, but when you get there and you live and you've got this UFC fighter or Bellator or PFL or whatever the fighter is in front of you, that's like, hey, I got to make weight. We don't actually have access to a kitchen or whatever. Like, how do I actually make this work? Like, how do you actually make it work? And I think that's why it's really cool, like starting to show some more behind the scenes of and talk about it and get this info out there and be like, yeah, it's fine in theory, but when it comes to practice and you've got to run around, you got to Uber to Walmart out in the ghetto out here and then get that food back. And then you have to do that every 2 days because you want to keep everything fresh and you can't freeze anything. So you've got to keep everything fresh and healthy and whatever. It's a whole different ball game.
Yeah, it's basically the whole week of like problem solving. Hey, like dealing with everything as it pops up, and yeah, just trying to figure out how to make things work with whatever you've got. Like there's a lot of improvising that goes on, and that's like a really cool, like interesting part of the job. Like it takes away the routine of like if you're in a hospital, you're just prescribing people food or whatever off the menu. Like now all of a sudden we've got to figure out how to cook in a hotel room using minimal equipment and random access to foods. It was really cool.
Yeah, and also like when you're cutting weight, right? Like that's always an interesting scenario because whether you're in an Airbnb, you're in a hotel, like it's never straightforward. That's one thing I've always learned is like always expect the unexpected. Like even if you've got a bathtub, it's probably not going to be big enough or the hot water doesn't work properly. And then you've got this room and you need to figure out, okay, how do I logistically do this with two people at the same time and then keep all of this flowing? And I know that Kai needs to do this much amount of time in the bath, and then Bloods needs to do this much, and then we need to swap, and then we need to make sure this is a seamless transition. And I know this guy gets a little woozy at this time, so I need to make sure I've got eyes on him. But then this guy's doing this, so it's always just huge problem solving and like logistics. Again, all this stuff that you just never read in a book. So that's why I always get so excited when I get to bring you guys out here to see it firsthand, because you can talk about it and you can write about it as much as you want, but until you experience what one of these fight weeks is like at the highest level, it's almost hard to describe. And like we're not really doing it justice, like just how intense it is and how crazy it is, and logistically what a big challenge it is.
Yeah, no, it's a whole ordeal, and it's like, as you said, it's pretty hard to describe without actually just being there and kind of going through the whole process, which was really cool. And then like it was kind of cool to sit back and reflect on it at the end and just kind of think about all the different things that like I'd kind of just learned basically over the whole week. Like obviously we've been doing this for a while, and like I think I've been with TFD now for like 2 years, and there's still so much that I'm learning, like going through these fight weeks. And I'm guessing it's probably the same for you, like because everyone's like, no fight week's going to be the same, right? Like there's always random stuff going on. So I think that's a really cool part of it too, is just that there's always kind of like room to learn and expand your own practice doing this sort of stuff, right? Like it's just getting out there and kind of putting yourself in a challenging situation, and then having to kind of step up into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll keep this one pretty short. We'll wrap this up here, Dojo, but we do have another fight week coming up, UFC 278 with Leon Edwards coming up in Salt Lake City. So we're both out for that one in a week's time. I think less than a week we'll be out there, which is crazy to think that we've got to do more flying and moving around, but we'll get it done. And if you guys are listening to this, and if there's anything that you do want to see behind the scenes, or if you're hearing this and you want us to elaborate on it, shoot us a message. There's content you want to see us do, like how we actually make these meals, like how do we logistically figure out these weight cuts? Like there's a whole process of that. Like if you're cutting in an Airbnb, like how do you cut in the Airbnb and then get the guys to the hotel, which is probably like 20 minutes across town, and how do you navigate all of that? There's a lot of logistical thinking that goes into it. But like I said, it's just really just experience. And I don't really know another team that has as much experience doing this as what we have consistently at the highest level with as many guys that we have done it with. So if you do have questions about it, by all means, shoot them through, and then we'll try to address it this next fight week.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks for having me on, Jordy.
All right, Dojo. I'll see you in Salt Lake City.
Catch you, boss.